think of probably an island, Iceland in the middle of nowhere somewhere, ocean somewhere, right? Turns out Cuba's only 90 miles half the width of having the coast of Florida, but when we talk about Cuba's island or an insulated country, economically dysfunctional states, our recession, Cuba's more locked off from the rest of the world by the ocean and the other seas. 90 miles are some of the longest miles in the tidal water. Our understanding of lake use of language really affects the treat Latin America, particularly metaphor before we use violent and colonial metaphors. We describe the name key of the New World Jonah of the Antilles to something that actually had no stable meaning. Treating these metaphors as universal description of the colonial and Aristotle us in 2009 became the way attention by way of figurative depiction of form metaphors and with colonial means the key of the New World, the key to develop between the pearl, the gem of the Antilles metaphor representation developed into principle of West Americans from pound possession U.S. manner indispensable to the well-being of U.S. Americans created a parallel reality in which they persuaded themselves to persuade the others that Cuba rightfully belonged to conditional constructs were central in the process by which national interest been acted by idealists, purposes, source of entitlement, the North American use of metaphors, equal use of cultural models, and social relationship with U.S. imperial controls condition metaphors of Cuban advanced to a century that were in turn radiated by racial attitudes and gender hierarchies, letting universal description of Cuba as an object to be dominated, permeated in public discourse, locks and appeals notion of Latin America, displaces the infinite possibility of understanding of the complex cultural relationship we have with other present 2008 that Americans can define independent. Their claim to Cuba appeals was inscribed within cultural forms and deployed by way of metaphorical contract is useful, while it's a comic Cuba entry the American imagination by way of metaphor. Cuba is the promise metaphor as one of North American discourse, the production of knowledge, the degree to which metaphor so utterly displays alternative cognitive possibilities, Guantanamo Bay, proofs, arguments, description, and even location is totally contingent outside of something it can be. Language or geography can describe as neither in Cuba nor in U.S. central structure fails to properly describe as meanings as in 2007, Guantanamo Bay legal exception becomes the rules of all, symbolizing spatial awareness, new world order power prevents life without mediation of law, resurrected, takes the reverse management of Guantanamo Bay, appears both like topographical locations and non-space, but according to the American government's extraterritorial for the purpose of American law's location, placed inside Cuba at the same time outside, symbolizing topographical principle of empire and air report to be placed in Cuba, saying this is not Guantanamo Bay, it can't say threshold zone of humanity, the threshold concept around the imperial politics is organized, and debate after debate, we as a community discuss different ways to use Cuba's new frontier for making expansion and imperialism manifest as symbolism as the forefront of our discourse, still like Kazakhstan in 2010. Analytic eclectics says that intellectual stance should adopt and pursuing a research mitigation does not fit within a soft tradition of global-based privacy. Those search for the third department to to competition, plus the practice of the West Coast, incorporate one capacity and message predicting world situation and complex causal source and capture interaction between among different types of causal mechanisms and less than isolation from each other from separate research tradition and natural religion scholars identify the research tradition and knowledge needed for incorporating almost other person in order to fashion comprehensive supports knowledge. The prescriptions that directed and referenced to international religion are incomplete because they are based on partial analysis that collecting scholarship to a partial alternative understanding research that is coherent enough to be distinguishable from conventional scholarship, flexible enough to accommodate a wide range of problems, concept methods, and causal arguments. What is economic engagement? Economy in simplest form is a network of exchanging things in which we have the best value language and metaphor. The most prominent commodities in our economy that surrounds the concept of Cuba. We think our deconstructive engagement of that economy is a basis for productive discussion. Like et al. In 2004, the comparison between language money is like recurrent Western culture money is a general model for sending out across the public creation of values for question of language origin is dramatically of also research human rights many computer walls and the words of language is involved in this complex with transaction into studying transparency of all values. All these particles apply to states and symbols who set all values stand for word choice action which cannot be recognized or achieved with the above mentioned symbols. Following these usual conception of language and metaphor to perpetuate through a common public discourse represses subjective meaning. Lumberman 2012, the establishment of public discourse as an important mechanism of oppression of common discourse represses suppression serving as a broad-dimensional influence of an individual and public speech and the press of fantasy of common discourse well and the realm which is subject to great meaning and communicate with potential present collective signifying body brand brought by collective representation of psychology and a kind of beyond control of an individual intellect language and a conditional possibility that inserted within identity investments and stupidity of signification where prevents external crowding or sharing these premise by authentic intersubjective exchange intention to his metaphor. We affirm that economic engagement towards human should be increased, but we affirm the topic in an equally different but equally valuable way. Why is it no one has approached the topic that's flashing it is no accident. Dominant forms of knowledge suppressed. So first and more particularly in debate, displacing a broader trend of logic and rationality, displacing myth and metaphor. Mythos is different. Mythos is the ambiguous and non-possible type which will always be at risk of being displaced by logocentrism. Spitzer et al. In 2010. Philosophy began with a dismissal of mythology versus excess mythos, mythos, period, because unclassified logos, the truth, mythos is there's no possible definite nature of mythos, ambiguity is problematic for philosophy, mythos opposed to philosophy into logos, supporting both mythos, myth is viewed as a transcendent reality, only logic and structure, philosophy is this, all of mythos and rational attention to express all structures within a construct and fortify themselves or acts of exclusion, exclude elements, resources within the system, destabilize the very connection mythos, discriminates and deconstructs the gateway back to that's what mythos, the law has been, not as it has been logo essentially co-opted by a hegemonic meta-narrative mythos and inherently ambiguous and perverted and they escapes all tests to confront formalism into a synthetic discourse, transgressive affirmation, but not expose limits or reaffirm logos, they open up logocentrism to the excluded forms of knowledge, any other form of affirmation, reifies logos and allows our idea to be co-opted and Spencer all 2010 is possible to transgress limitation logos in ways that simply reaffirm logos. One transgression affirms the limitations of the limited can demonstrating that nothing is beyond bounds, everything is attainable, thinkable, limited, and transgression of states they affirm rejecting other limits, glorification of the existence limited, opens finally out to the limitless transgression opens the limit to a tormented expense that is powerless to the delimited defined as based on definition category tradition is neither violence in the ethical world nor a victory over this affirms the limitless forever since philosophy is logos traditional affirmation necessary limits itself by inscribing one that which an affirms within the transcend presence and here no ability our affirmation rejects interpretive authority which produces violence and other international public criminal overnight. The experience of discriminatory mismatch between attention and perception on different interpretation of the same message often upset us. Discrepancies are apparent but not dismiss these sharing metaphor rather we find either a process of communication unreliable. We dismiss them as pathological. We dismiss them in terms of unfortunate condition as devious misconduct. We have reason to believe all the ulterior motives the author this authority may be a distinguished person and an institutionalized person. There's always a authority's experts here to impose authority violence in the U.S. First on the streets but in homes, silence and families as about who has the authority to decide the interpretation that must accept as true. National comments are embedded language one side claim to be correct, honorable, absurd, justified, blaming the other formal interpretation question like what do you want the symbols mean for your world will not require such an authority. Our critique brings up the arbitrariness and boundaries of language to metaphor and wordplay. This interweaving disturbance is the most just and ethical response to the subjectivity of meaning and good action short of ours enables the domination of otherness. McDonald 1999, a performative interpretation transforms what it interprets as definitive, performs the unauthorized art speech activity of the untaken constructability, a certain idea of justice, if they critique appears, no difference to perform text stand is designed to interpret our conflicts meaning applied plain independent the arbitrary of other seeking sector practice a consistent combination of wordplay metaphors, taking things to extreme, the interweaving, the multiple text and veil, meanings become jumbled, the new and unexpected meanings become numerous and overall effects of unsettled text of any correspondential intention categories meaning are posed by us onto otherness as way of order containing and dominating language is a necessary violence for which we can search or the just or ethical responsible political responsible and corresponding openness and promise of democracy which can never be wholly realizable at present. The sense of wonder found in embracing unknowable potentiality is crucial to break down oppressive hierarchies. McManus in 2007, the ethical probability of wonder is a force of ethical energetics. One of its moves the essential wonder speaks to a sense of agency that has been neglected in philosophy and politics. Wonder works the reminds of body's openness, vital and directly ethical energy and all its layered intensity. Of course, one can remove within wellness where we are taught the adaptation of threats, poverty, suffering, estrangement, dangers, others of which regarding as wonder makes possible reflexive interventional wonder. This force that undermines some key opposition is sustained master-slave relations and the relation domination of possession of masculine over the feminine bodies over other bodies of wonder. Force of wonder is to maintain the open and potentially transformative space of the in-between wonder cast out upon hierarchical ways of knowing the world and knowing the other wonderments and significant theoretical affective epistemological resource that creates insane ways of thinking being the embodied and form of resistance and relational lethal transgressions as rules. We are not a rejection of empiricism or truth, but rather a reformation of knowledge to better understand the interweaving of language. Actually, I'm not going to read the process.
You're not going to read that last part?
Yeah, Donald.
Alright. Why? Go down.
So the second contention says that we need to open up the topic to something more subversive like mythos. We think our interpretation of the topic and our analysis of language is
what's wrong with the current language used by the topic?
Yeah, so like the first part of what I see describes different colonial metaphors we've used to describe Cuba in the past. We've made it, or we've performed an analysis of that and said
what colonial metaphor?
Yeah, so there was like the key of the New World, the gem of the Antilles, all of those sort of metaphors.
Okay, and is this like applicable in debates? Like, is this like what's the uniqueness for debates? Like the air doing that, and that's that using Cuba as a metaphor. What is the broader uniqueness for it at? Like, what is wrong with debate or in broader side?
Oh, okay. So I guess our argument, uniqueness argument in the context of debate is that the majority of teams use the resolution as simply a way for the U.S. to economically engage Cuba in the traditional sense. We performed an analysis and said that our interpretation of the topic.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. If that's true, why do you normally read a traditional policy Cuba app and switch this around?
I'm sorry?
Why do you normally use Cuba and economic engage within defend industrial ag and multilateralism? And why do you switch this around?
Yeah, so reading this app and this debate is the example of transgressing the traditional interpretation of the topic.
Okay, when you engage in those same oppressive structures.
I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. The Cuba.
Yeah, our argument is that traditionally people, even us, use language as a way to be colonialist. We've performed an analysis of those metaphors and said that analysis is critical to describe oppressive hierarchies.
The first two tags talk about Latin America. What is that?
Huh?
First two tags talk about.
Yeah, that's kind of our point, is that you can't nail down Latin America into a definition.
Okay, we can't nail it down. You record quotes that wonder, disrupts, and undermines key objects that sustain master-slave relations I have two questions. First one is a slave, and how does wander do that?
Again, we're not really in the business of defining certain terms, kind of the point of the app. What was the second
You're
question?
going to say terms without being accountable / defining them?
I don't understand how that makes us unaccountable. I think using a cross-text to say define this, and then in the one in C saying you define something, that means you don't solve your app, is kind of circular and not really the point of the approach.
Okay, so answer my second question.
Yeah, what was it?
How does wander stop master-slave relationship?
Yeah, so our piece of McManus evidence says that wander transgresses traditional limitations that things like the state place on people. So
Like if you're being arrested by the cops, you just be like, oh my god, what a wonderful future.
yeah, so like that's an
situation. So
simple
that's how it's
our
argued.
argument.
That's what?
That's like not what our argument
Okay,
is.
so tell me what it is.
Yeah, okay, I was doing that. So our argument is that wander transgresses traditional, state being oppressive to people because it opens up the possibility of being more subversive, opening up language and metaphor and kind of disturbing the traditional ways that people use it. Any impression?
Two off case.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it.
Two off case.
Any more specific on the case, or just
Case.
Keep this in that Dropbox?
Yeah.
Okay, we're both ready.
Good.
Okay.
The only ethical option is to call for the end of the world, calling attention to antagonism that outgroups the U.S. is the only way to address the conflict within it, like the ways of Wilson, and draw attention to violence on the rest of the modern world, capacity to think that it would be crazy to call the world itself into account. It's very practical, but the world itself into account when we make a world that responds to the illusion and expectation. As we provide prepared to demolish itself because the slave structure of the U.S. antagonism would be dismantled, would be mixed with important conflicts that would have one level, taken to class struggle, gender conflict, immigration, rights, and shallow to the level, as well as the power of black retreat, and take the white radical who from time for struggle, black pants, the young voices have affected temperature in the political landscape, but also the political protocol required with the revolutions, ideas of public order, unfettered ethics, the American PIC, you see the Mackie, the one who respects the romantic social terror, the improvement of the reconcilable struggle between the resolution, which is not dialect of the terror, the obliteration of one of these positions, grammar and tactic, bringing the mediancy of conflict, regardless of sentiment of the fifth war spirit of unity, political discourse into question. Now, civil society maps itself by reconfiguration of rights through freedom, making its position of an anti-blackness, the construction of American monopoly, hegemony, coherence. What is needed is the radical rejection of society's incoherence. Wilson, in 2003, slavery is the great level of black subject position, how we press back on the grammar, hegemony, that's registered with the incoherence, all other body, and so responsibility to complete disorder, blackness is a sign of absolute terrorism, backlog, as a map of gratuitous violence, which is civil society is possible, political desire to exact black society, dance with black liberation, radical more, debuts, United States position, possibility, possible, refusal, complete disorder, moment, and grievance disorder, the state political movement in the United States today is part of negrophobia, the imposition of black subject, to discomfort of civil society. Now, their silence perpetuates white privilege, Dr. Prince 97, ideology, white privilege, operates with rhetorical science, so say ideology, white privilege, science, nationalized, subject to colossal lawsuits, dimension, science, for whites, are people for protecting white privilege, science, act, and not passive, about speech, about way to signify that description, silence, domestic divide that is the national condition to be assumed, no silence, to realize the hierarchical structure, and actually the speech. Now, the system of white supremacy also creates the myth of the moral minority. It creates a discourse of the immigrant as a deserving poor, which justifies and decided a black working class is taken to death. If you channel open up knowledge when it comes to taking a black working class, a third warning of migrant activity, and since the Asian American popular percent in this period, that one of the black culture, poverty, the core subject, so called to immigrant, social, cultural practice which statement for upper class gathered comfort over rudiments of discourse for input deserve report the locations determine behavior the constitutional cultural property behavior that the evolution that decided black underclass. Now part of our performance is confrontation with the myth of the minority. We revere white supremacy of a vector of oppression it uses to police minority polity. There are several impacts. First is the psychological violence of Asian Americans. Second is the oppression of other minorities that white supremacy justifies through the myth of the minority. Third is resentment between these groups. Time in 93 one minority Asian American portrayed how intelligent the personal purpose to general public to ignore the needs of my feelings reading a couple of something one can see the label for tool oppression with the denying existence of the discrimination against the Asian American which minor oppression other racial minorities disagree substantial following both inside outside the Asian American community disagree audience opposite with the problem Latin American Asian American city the objects of that design funding for social service program calls Mr. Chair school Asian American study for opportunity program the African American Latino poor which are told look at those Asian and income making into this country this plan is justified by the media which seeks to be a conclusive with the project of racial minorities what creates resentment against Asian American the minority service like convenience capable as Korean Americans Los Angeles Florida figure out many Korean Americans have viewed themselves as human feel competent the white majority in the anger of the black majority isolation racially oppressed release determination of humanity bearable in 84 as long as institutional rights exist social tenants will provide about the confrontation when intellectual art fails to comprehend and racial gender quality being created energy being individual contributed to a lot of justification by practice by hesitating to dedicate ourselves to the work of peace, pursuit of peace and social we contribute dynamic national sovereignty the peace of black America remains isolated maybe termination humanity itself that the alternative is the alpha paradigm outside of the culture whether national society is ethical wellness and can alpha paradigm outside to move into the overthrown exist over compromise over to a whole moderate freedom of fire political application alpha paradigm and that's will allow any potential dispute by the pragmatic consideration we advocate power pose questions very powerful we perform this through conscientization process maybe I will understand force of oppression on our identity also too much of conscientization being able to name with our meaningful education for understanding effects force of oppression have on the lines of process that involves a constant clarification what remains hidden when there's a while we move about the world probably books recognition will dynamically and make such recognition to inspire people to work against oppression beginning their efforts to transform the world the world was a process to actively changing our method includes a process of self-reflection we must work on the pressure we cause and lean into that discomfort instead of distancing ourselves more in allowing intersectionality counterfeit we particularly understand matrix oppression and its address our own capability and matrix oppression to seek to demolish the political framework the way in which we function as an action we opportunity to reduce the improve can you occupy each of the required to locate the I and intersection which reflects on the honor site privilege working on the level of self-interest we can rally around progression next up is the critique the concept of Latin American represented a specific take on hybridity which combines identity in order to assimilate the indigenous into brutal colonialism and salvatory 6 America's invention saturated coloniality to conceive the intersection and expansion of Geographical new world Latin American radical potential of culture by rebalance national culture present the little colonial context the defendant towards European civilized part of one person putting in everything to the planet Africa the Latin American the identity true hybrid Latin American order just have the framework of modern colonialism and indigenous civilization and roots of Latin American the spreading intellectual and freedom of the smart cultural displacement intellectual process that started European modernity beginning to some extent, structure hegemonic Latin America, emerging border thing, a concept for articulate form of manifesto place to observe, or practical. Now the alternative is to be able to we can reject, we can reuse reconceptualize what a metaphor is. However, we reject the use of Latin America in the one you see this also the case because the idea of Latin America is the best way to do it. Miller, no, and the continental divided geographically, to have the division content to political structure, cultural and imperial structure, excavation, colonial foundation. Idea Latin America will help us unravel geopolitical knowledge of reality that it's also about right historical capital producing a decoloration to the object and all the idea Latin America can be dealing with isolation without producing turmoil that was that can be separated from Europe and even the down the American consequences European commercial especially as the idea Latin Americans really don't understand the West world and the modern world is about it not going to case. The affirmative play was a deliberate rigid form of debate. It's a uniquely white experience of theorizing from nowhere, sitting on top of an ivory tower without a mention of their race identity, only reproduces the authority to speak himself for get identity. Yamsi 2005, I can't right from the place to live in body experience. The only topic disability is to read on it. Embody self practice TV influence to it's the best we are told reason for nowhere. Hence the white philosopher to speak for all of them without the study of activities or her race identity. The way to opportunity is for also authority to speak from nowhere is empowered through one use of power to become launched. Want to use the pleasure for the self for the pleasure of firing experience of comprehension of racial material. The practical worship functions as a theorizing critical whiteness. But in capable of going historical process and also the piece of example advice and the body meaning whether phenotypical white black psychology is probably the abstract performance of competent racial and reproduction of body which is by historical practice to discourse body to modify this term of meaning a stage script constituted through the project limitation to have one dark body invaded by the white gaze to have a body alternative to totally possible avoid the violation of ego is turn into the white man being perception which we see made a social imaginary social passive imaginary social historical evidence emergent so not only black but the white body as well as seen as white gaze seen by body comes up in the area that this type of objectivity ethics it calls it a callous advocacy which justifies atrocities no mediatory no seven valorizations the technical facility institutional life to be confused with the from objectivity for work at dissonance, social location, isolation from a problem, which is my sexual standpoint of being privileged and voted, about being experience social suffering, just be about one place, you have to go there, you get very responsible attention, we promote intention, live equipment, ethic, and counseling, and different analysis, major exemplary constitution, when they assume rejected and attitude towards the death hand, particularly providing a company ally for turning our back to violence. Now, language first reflects our attempt to avoid Hiroshima's reality of guilt Davis in 2001. The dramas of real symbolic strategy films explaining the recognition of Black picture about the bomb, this white culture today, moving the media with hyper-real proliferation of self-account like that, fiction horror. To turn horror into only possible conflict accident referee, elephant play, signify Hiroshima language, coming for culture, perhaps such a receipt to order the denial of referee impossible, at least a fabulous texture, deconstructed, someone takes the final step in to gain relief from the unspeakable horror, the average or protect the audience for the history which guarantees confronted with the post-modern and non-continuing human can only compare one to the reality.
What's the status of the two advocacies?
The first one.
What was it?
The second one is.
Both are unconditional.
The second one is not more of an alternative; it's more of a case.
Tag literally says the alternative solves the app.
I do not believe the tag.
Okay, well that's what you said. So what is
The
it?
tag is this called solves the case. We say that the use of Latin America is bad. We can go for this as an alternative, saying that we can do the.
Yeah, that's fine. The first critique. I guess go through the link arguments.
You want me to go through them?
That's
Okay,
what
first
I
one is our Wilkerson argument saying that civil society maps itself through the use of anti-blackness. We said that app is one example of that.
Wait, what? Hold on. Logical jumps that you need to close.
Well, you say that we have to look at and interpret language, figure out these metaphors, break them down against Cuba. We say that that is inherently outside the subject position of the black body, which is ontologically.
Okay, but we're not the black body, so what are we
That's
supposed
not
to
the
do?
point.
You know the entire part of the one where he talks about this symbolic economy and how that is the entire basis for languages. Remember that?
Well, yeah, we read one per card. You're correct.
That's the basis of our argument, and we say that's bad because there is an object, aka the black body, which is outside the symbolic economy because of the
Okay,
violence.
how does that
Whenever violence is inflicted upon them, it's not a part of an exchange or word or whatever Heideggerian nonsense you're talking about. It's gratuitous.
What's an example of this affirmative that would resolve the silence link?
Silence
We
link.
literally have to
When you
start.
talk about the racialized identity, maybe confront your privilege in the way you see.
Yeah, okay, so what's an
Examples
example of
like-
a way we can do that? Can you just say the
I don't know, get rid of an expropriate, like, the Cuban embargo, about the Afro-Cubans there.
About anti-black violence.
We destroyed the United States, we have a drug reparations
Wait, but
act.
how does that recognize our privilege? That just talks
That's
about
part of the
anti-violence.
policy that should have been there. Another act is like the drug reparations act where we.
I don't know exactly what your subject position is, but I want to see that acknowledges your subject.
What's the link to the model minority arguments, or is that just like an internal net benefit?
It's also
It's
a
a part of our performance with
it's a part of our internal net benefit. Also, it's a way we perform the alternative.
Okay,
It's
so
our way of
is there-
privatization.
I guess how is that competitive with any part of the 1AC?
How's that competitive? First, the links make it competitive.
Right, but is there a link to model minority to app, or is it just the two link arguments we talked about?
Your regular notions of competition is very different in a foreign round where you have defended the entire discourse of everyone who's speaking, aka everything you say is important about metaphors. And also, if we prove that you are anti-black, the system of anti-blackness upholds the myth of the minority, which is
What metaphors do the second alt analyze does?
The ones of the one C.
Okay, well, Latin America is included in the
Basically,
1AC.
affirmative without.
Part of the 1NC said we can still analyze metaphors, but we can't analyze Latin America.
Maybe
What
a
is-
lot of these ones. Our understanding and use of language greatly affects the way we treat Latin America.
Okay, but what? Okay, you're prepping. Okay, so what metaphors does the second alt analyze?
We can
It does
project the
analyze
use of
Latin
Latin America. We can say that we can.
Great, but a quote from the 1NC says that we can still analyze
Key of the world,
metaphors.
the
just
general
not Latin
activities.
America.
We can still use and analyze those metaphors without using the words Latin America.
Okay. Not at all.
So is this sufficient?
Yeah, that's fine. Just
Okay, step right.
actually, I'm making.
You'll have to write that down.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we are. My bad.
Here, just give it to me. It says sending ... Okay. Yeah.
What's the order?
The order is the case page, and then the second critique, then. Okay, is anybody not ready? Oh, are you good?
Yeah.
Thesis statement: you cannot use objective language to prove subjective issues. Spitzer reference indicates that it creates forms of interpretive authority which they have no impact defense who we have impacted in the form of international conflict. Things like the Israel-Palestine conflict occur because both sides think they have the capital T truth on their side, which prevents negotiations. Constant reliance on violence as a foreign policy tool. The plan disrupts logico-centric forms of discussion by discussing conceptions of metaphor. That's the Spitzer references in the plan is wide experience. We sever those underlying underpinnings of white privilege because we have deconstructed language, which is the rhetorical tool that whites use to reinscribe oppressive hierarchies. They say objective ethics is bad. The plan is obviously in line with this. The plan breaks down conceptions of objectivity, i.e. interpretive authority, which means that we internally turn this. The Hiroshima argument is absolutely ridiculous and not in the context of the Athens using language as a rhetorical weapon to persecute and try to deconstruct the identity of Japanese victims, which is obviously something you want to see mitigates the criticism. Thanks for the new advantage. The criticism is the thesis of the Ath. That part of cross-sex when Michael asks Holmes, what is Latin American? Holmes said, we're not in the business of handing out definitions. Proves our argument. We are an impact turn to the endpoint of the criticism. The idea that Latin America is necessarily constructed in certain ways attempt to pin down meaning to absolute truth in this form of interpretive authority that reinforces systems of domination. Proves we internal into the thesis that the criticism the McDonald definite stance on language is a worse form of exclusionary politics that exacerbates all their offensive decimates solvency. They can't really make up on their mind on whether or not there's an alternative, but if there is permutation to both, obviously solves we are criticism of exclusivity, which proves that the permutation is the best option. The F is an impact turn to the net benefit style monolithic interpretations of nebulous concepts like Latin America are a culture of interpretive authority. Also proves that the criticism solves enough our internal links because it rejects things like the fluidity of language. The criticism, the Cuba is shaped both discursively and methodologically by the way we use language. This morphs our understanding and allows us to frame the water is backwards. Things like the gem of Antilles and Guantanamo prove that logos constructs a false reality around us and traps us in it. White supremacy does not operate in a single fashion. 3. Structuring logics governed. This is a compartmentalization to set the overdetermining of the logic of slaveability replicates white supremacy by papering over benefits blacks receive from colonialism and Orientalism. Smith and Tony wish to re-articulate our understanding of white supremacy by not assuming that it's enacted by simply in a single fashion. White supremacy is not constituted by separate distinct and still interrelated logic. The 3 primary logics of white supremacy include slaveability, which anchors capitalism, genocide, which anchors colonialism, and Orientalism, which anchors war. The logic of slavery renders black people as inherently enslavable. The logic itself is consistent. This logic is the anchor of capitalism. The second pillar of white supremacy is the logic of genocide. This logic holds that indigenous people must disappear. They must always be disappearing. Non-native people become the rightful inheritors of all that was indigenous. Genocide serves as the anchor of colonialism. The third pillar of white supremacy is the logic of Orientalism. The logic of Orientalism marks certain peoples or nations as inferior. Imagine as permanent fourth third empire. Orientalism serves as the anchor of Orientalism. Allows for the U.S. to defend the logic of slavery and genocide. These practices enable it to stay strong strength strong enough to fight these constant wars. The United States is not at war. The United States is war. Permutation to both the act as an impact turn to conceptualizations of exclusivity, inclusive analysis, and critical to break down forms of interpretive authority and white supremacy. Their model minority argument makes no sense in the context of the rest of the criticism, and even if it does, it only proves that objective use of language results in the deployment of Asians as a tool of discrimination. Debate today is marked by a structural conflict that is determined by the black-white binary, which is a form of interpretive authority that papers over the oppression of Asians and allows for the perpetuation of things like the model minority, Alcoff, and dirty power of people of color would require correlations to dominant discourse of racial politics, and inhibits an understanding of how racism operates to vis-a-vis Asian Americans, and provides a more of an obstacle to coalition, rather building than the Asian Americans were brought to the country as cheap labor and denied rights. Both are coming from countries that have been sensitive of imperialist wars. Many experience with the U.S. government well before they became immigrants. Latinos and Asian Americans have been the victims of native arguments that have been portrayed as foreigners on account of these forms of discrimination that have not been incorporated in the civil rights paradigm of progressive politics and discourse. Lack social justice mark has been dominated by the black-white paradigm which governed racial politics. Mark the card of politics now. Law is not direct neutrally. It is the outcome of a particular pedagogy and a way of discussing the world. We must change our pedagogical approach towards the modern colonial environment. Only our affirmative engages with the island of Cuba and its aspect of rhetorical imperialism. The alternative is literally an act of Genesis amnesia. Solomon and Breakaway in 2012 ideas have become viewed as natural and others as deviant. There can only be a singular truth within schools. Alternative visions are seen as destructive anti-American or treasonous. Rhetorical imperialism as well as colonization of the mind resulted from its desire of empire expansion. Once empire wrapped onto the shores of communities who would be slaughtered, enslaved, or colonized, rationale had who could be created to legitimate the brutality of the colonists, and rhetorical imperialism and Genesis amnesia are ideological tools used to suppress the power and the knowledge of indigenous people. Law and politics have been used to perpetuate harm that is not enough to be aware of the inequalities and exploitation. We also understand how law serves to contribute to the creation and sustainment of the maintenance of inequality. They've also conceded a correlation that the UNAC has framed between law and language. They do not deconstruct language, which means that they allow for the legal underpinnings of institutions that reinscribe white supremacy to exist internally in turns most of their offense. We are also a lantern of their starting point. Logos centrism underlies all forms of oppression, oppressive decision-making. The understanding mythos is critical to break down and understand structures of modernity, imperialism, oppression, etc. It is also their structural antagonism. Our argument mythos is the antagonistic opposite of logos. The interruption of logocentric debate practices that is our permutation argument. Even if race is not socially constructed, the systemic relationship to it is there not it's not a racially defining feature that it is what the white police brand of black bodies. Those are created through particular discourses that justify colonialism through the imposition of normative standards of behavior to qualify as humans. It will never win uniqueness to any of their arguments because the criticism is all descriptive of the status quo, i.e. language is being used as a rhetorical tool to oppress individuals in the status quo, which means that it's try or die for the affirmative, and there's a low risk of criticism offensive. Their starting point is incorrect. Ontology is determined by epistemology. The way we engage black and indigenous bodies are determined by the knowledge produced by those body staff. It's a necessary prerequisite to the alternative. Mabel and Hay and 12, there's no opposition between East and West been entangled, and here you have a case where there's no why the annotation to geopolitics of knowledge is so crucial to colonial thinking. The epistemology is crucial to colonial thinking because ontology is always an epistemic construct, so that for us it is necessary but not sufficient to study the economics and political aspect of capitalism. Capitalism is possible because there are architects and supporters who were able to build a structure of epistemology that justify the building of capitalism in spite of all the disaster that capitalism brings with the control of knowledge. Means also formation and transformation of subjectivity. See, criticism, analysis of modernity inaccurately describes the basis of modernity as the Atlantic commercial trade. It misses the epistemic basis of modernity. The focus on slavery allows the continuation of Eurocentric thought and violence and reinscribes new forms of violence by elevating philosophy to the narrative of the universal. McMillan and 10, the Atlantic commercial circuit did not immediately become the location of Western hegemonic power. Just one more commercial circuit among those existing modernities. The moment of Western history that linked the Atlantic to the Atlantic commercial circuit and the transformation of capitalism to Western civilization. Macro-narrative that emerged in the Renaissance was consolidated during the Enlightenment by German philosophy. The macro-narrative has had his geography. Both macro-narratives are founded in the same principle, same principles of Western epistemology. Modernity is often celebrated as having coloniality, yet its critique books of coloniality, the double process of an indicative of Quijano is the inscription of the colonial difference of the consequence of a colonial power. Coloniality assumes first that coloniality is constituted from modernity as a consequence. We are still living under the same regime. The alternative is also emblematic of Eurocentric fundamentalism. The attempt to find a pure outside space of modernity is a Eurocentric process, a response to a Eurocentric problem. Only the affirmative rectifies this grasp. In 2005, the history of modern world system is privileged. The epistemology produced by the West modern topic as a global sound by the West world relates to shelter cultures and people from a position of superiority and to step forward epistemologies of the non-Western world in the imposition of Christianity, market Christianity.
Start on a critique. Your Smith evidence says one pillar of white supremacy is the logic of slavery.
Sure.
The second pillar of white supremacy is the logic of genocide. This logical
the second pillar of slavery is the logic of colonialism, which is supported
I'm reading
by...
your card, okay?
Right.
Second pillar of white supremacy is the logic of genocide. This
This
logic holds that indigenous people must disappear. A third pillar of white supremacy is the logic of Orientalism. This seems like what white supremacy is a bad thing. What about the critique?
The argument is there are three pillars of oppression in the status quo. There's the relationship of the black-white binary. There's the relationship
black-white binary. Where does this card talk about black-white binary? It seems to be talking about the logic of slavery and how that led into capitalism.
Anti-black racism is antithetical to whiteness.
The critique is a rejection of white supremacy. Why is it not just another?
If your argument that there is a pillar of, and that there's or one of the pillars that Smith is talking about is not the black-white binary, you're sorely mistaken.
Anti-black racism always perpetuates the black-white binary. Is that clear?
No, the argument is that one of the pillars that he discusses is the relationship of slavery and blacks and whites in the history of America.
This is that white supremacy.
I haven't gotten to the other two. It's really important.
If the critique rejects white supremacy, why is this not another impact?
Solve argument.
Yeah.
What about this? This is describing white supremacy.
This might make a lot more sense if you let me read the other two pillars. Wait,
I just read it for you. The second pillar of white supremacy.
The second pillar is the
relationship
between the settler and the settled. The second pillar is the relationship between the settler and settled. The third relationship is the relationship between the Occident and Orientals.
Okay.
Those
all
three
under the umbrella of white
operate in a form.
supremacy. If it's all under the umbrella of white supremacy gone, can these things as settlerism, colonialism exist?
No, the point is that no, I didn't say no, I said you were correct. I said no, I said what you're saying is factually
This is not getting anywhere in the next question.
inconsistent.
Your alcohol.
It's not getting anywhere because you're not letting me finish.
Alcohol evidence. Can you explain to me the impact of the black-white binary? Why is it bad?
Our argument says that it papers over other forms of oppression. Things like Chinese women were not allowed to come to the U.S. except as prostitutes. Indian immigration workers that worked on railroads were not allowed to procreate because their babies wouldn't be assumed as white. That all fits within the black-white binary, but those forms of oppression are not defined by things like the black-white binary. It discusses racism is antithetical to whiteness, which ignores other forms of oppression like Asian Americans, Amerindians, Latin Americans, etc.
Solemn breakaway evidence says rhetorical imperialism as well as colonization of the mind creates these. Why? If we reject the laws that solemn breakaway says causes rhetorical imperialism, then why?
It says that the reason those laws are able to exist is because of linguistic objectivity.
Seriously, since laws and policies have been used to perpetuate harm, it seems like the other way around.
Okay. Yes, laws and policies have been used to perpetuate harm. That's fine, but the underpinning of those laws is linguistic objectivity,
Really, it seems
which
that
the one is taking issue
It
with.
seems that laws and policies causes the colonization of the mind.
I don't know where you think it's.
Rhetorical imperialism as well, it causes the colonization of the mind.
Right, rhetorical imperialism causes forms of psychological and actual hierarchies. Those only exist because of linguistic objectivity, which the one is taking issue with.
What's that?
Yes. Hey, what was the argument you made after the Solomon breakaway evidence? There was an internal link to your argument. I can't read my handwriting.
I don't have a read now. Do you have like
I do. The starting point argument? You didn't start from a premise of language?
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think that's what you're talking about.
There was a link before the logocentric starting point that. believe I used to win 30. Is that wrong, sir?
Buildings, rolling, sounds right to me.
See 30 left?
Yeah. You don't even put our evidence while you're debating. They're so good.
It'll be justified.
What one?
No, right.
No idea what you said.
I said the race chick.
Okay.
Anybody not ready? Alright, wait, take a second.
Can't give me a wrong look like that.
Sorry about that. Alright, ready?
Okay.
The K is a fundamental performance about starting points. He chose language and metaphors like the starting point. So we choose to interrogate the ontological necessity and also the racism underpinning the United States, which is the reason why they affirm every performance and start contradicting each other. They are the silence and coming out of the way, which is changing the rest of the day. They try to claim that coloniality is the underpinning system for all technical metaphors. How can you claim an argument with the white state question of the silent the question of racism? The white state is silent on the question of colonialism. Not a single one of the cards talk about coloniality. Several of the first ones saying that they were colonial metaphors using Cuba. What are these new metaphors? Why are those colonial metaphors that the white state does absolutely nothing to interrogate them? And the question evidence says that that's the reason why they can't have solved, because the question evidence says that when you say silent question of racism, that makes racism the assumed order. It causes racism to be promoting these species and poison their performance. The role of value best performed human methodological liberation expressed to we have a method and performance after the answer. The negative does affect, so the affirmative does not meet the method of the performance, which is the reason why they link. Also, the second argument about strong was all the arguments about interlocality. The more evidence says that we need to actually question ourselves. We need to look at a piece of the question when also except if we unless we do that, we're gonna actually put in attempt to use language. If the Highland question say the silent question racism does not come to grips with these terms. When they run a Cuba action outside and just switch off with this round, that means that they have not dealt with the pressure within themselves, and the reason why they still perpetuate the same kind of violence that they try to fight, which is the reason why this is an attack so everything to the affirmative will the reason why alternate selves. This was not a question. These are the says that we need unflinching paradigm analysis. This is an ontological question as an intellectual of why these structures exist within civil society. Just changing the way all that language is absolutely jack shit for the material condition in the real world. What could have trained modern said to George generated to stop each other? Absolutely nothing, because it was gratuitous violence. Proof that the world doesn't work that way. Also, the only impact arguments from the YC is all about wonder. So wonder does absolutely nothing. These are the man said so it is written in the conscience of Earway, who is a feminist. Now think about racial. How does wonder stop the people in prison within civil society today? How does wonder stop gratuitous violence on page of the lowest evidence hermicide? Because the sense of the system can only change material. Also, I believe cases of emancipatory discourse, but now it may be possible not to find really straight. Let's listen to that say, emancipatory discourse represented as a fair balance, what you find today. Logic table, white flies bad, why increasing confidence in people, lots of inclusive violence, emancipatory discourse, the marginal feminism, post-colonial and sexual liberation, ecological movement, discourse predicated grammar and suffering might not have developed, chattel slavery created the human agriculture in this rare area. Now the line by he says that Cuba was shaped by the globalists are trying to translate it. So these colonial metaphors were not interrogated. That should be part of what Cuba was not only shaped by colonialism, but anti-black violence, because coloniality is not started as before racism. Racism changed the system of coloniality because when the Europeans came over to the West, the Europeans had to actually pretend that the people on the land originally were not something, and that was driven by racism, and also the Atlantic slave trade started over the system of coloniality in the making. Bruce Ashford's King's argument, his next argument was the argument of structural competition. First of all, the structural competition argument is not exactly a dissatisfied alternative. This is what Gabe was questioning about. We saw more into violence through the process of consolidation, how nation rated to different areas within the conscious of the society, how they looked at foreigners, we challenged that to our performance, and how the party took absolutely nothing before the genocide of natives. We questioned this because we finally questioned the ethical system that the United States were built on. The wilderness says that civil society was built on the back of natives, which is the reason why the alternative results are not a permutation. The permutation, they should not get one because the basic question competing methodology. So why should be a static artifact if competition will want to discourse? The role of judges is choosing the content, which methodology is a better way to engage in the deconstruction of whiteness. Our counter-advocacy performance challenge. We have reasons. One is performance and violence. Representation is a vital act of violence in the way of trying to modify our performance for the battle. This is an independent reason for negative because they are acting on solid. It's the same logic where the slave master sees the world of the slave. Now, two is opportunity cost. Representation are test opportunity cost grounded in desire of the policy to human ability because the defense of the policy of representation is no longer applicable to this debate. Third argument is theory. The representation takes away the stand ground and the negative has to be. They chose not to ground the method. Any can be justified adding to the one speech act, especially if the speech act doesn't defend anything like we proved in the process. This underlies the class necessary to train performance ways to test and defend individual methodologies against white supremacy. Also, this had hybridity, grouping together oppressions, attacking power. DeLorean 77, liberation theology, assumes that common experience of oppression is insufficient. Appears to classify all minorities as a single kind of people seeking liberation. Such classification easy way to limit specific place and clever way to turn aside dissent ever up to dissent people. Liberation theology, the latest game to keep minority groups circling the Bible with the very hope that they can eliminate oppression. It does not seek to destroy the groups of oppression, but really to change the matter which oppression matters. He may devise clever ways to appear to change power, but he keeps a couple aces up and sleep and things out of control. All that links are dissatisfied with representation. We have multiple. One is anti-ethical decision making. They continue without justice and ethics. We said no, that just repairs society. Justice cannot occur without cap for black personality. We must be anti-ethical decision maker. That was the title of the McDonald Corner. Willis Evans makes a claim. Now, two is that they claim that language change reality is a link because we say that the condition of the slave is ontological and that's come first. The reality of the bill process precedes those language gains. The third argument is a symbolic economy. No, this is the blanket economy. The slave is outside the symbol economy. It is an object. That means that it is outside the symbol of symbolism entirely and outside the economy because violence is inflicted on the black bodies gratuitous and not part of an exchange. It's just done for no reason. The fourth link is subjectivity. This is a Mother card. It says that language is a condition of possibly for a subject with an identity invested. If it's only for a subject, how do people, objects within society actually have language games that you talk about? The same as I have actually because we change it as the affirmative is commensurable with the type of people. Now the fifth link is that a language person not alienation. The slave was disconnected entirely from the process of alienation. Now the sixth link is about hospitality. They claim that we should be open to wander, which is whiteness, because the position of the black subject is inherently a suspicious tag. When you hear you're knocking the door, you don't say, oh hey, wonder, surprise. You look for a cop because that is a necessary survival strategy for black and brown bodies. Now the seventh link is one of performance. So the claim of the repair meaning make it better and more truthful. Except even if language is crucial, their approach to it is explicitly and made an attempt to make it statistical. Now the eight arguments by the basic claim that violence is on the street. This is your creeping over card. How does the explain which violence occur when the cops on the street in the context of the statistical? Now they read this piece of alcohol violence. I'm explicitly going to concede the impacts of alcohol violence because you have messed up. Yes, we agree that all racism, we agree that the black minority does not explain some things except other types of racism. The Indian Americans, the Chinese American that they talk about is all in the system of anti-black violence, which is why we read the cards about the myth of the minority. You might say the myth of the minority is a way that white supremacy perpetuates the system of black anti-black by creating the black holes in the poverty, which is that the alternative is the only thing that's something impacting. These impacts should be prioritized because they're seen. Now the next argument is that the changing of it. Now the next argument is the Cylinder Brand Waves. We did not link to this evidence because we did not use the law. We protect the law and automatic empire, which is the reason why we're not feeding into these dumb numbers of language, which is the reason why we're late. The next argument is that we don't have a starting point for language. Even if we don't have a starting point for language, the entire criticism is often that because it proves that we need to challenge the table structure. The arguments by local sections about our answer by the terms case arguments and the impact framing arguments for why you should perform material violence that we can solve it, and also the self-violence that we create. These are all impacts that should be prioritized because it's the only thing that we can solve. How do you solve the language? You guys better know the changing things. But those are not the questions. He says that we have no uniqueness and we should try that. We have uniqueness in the context of these aspects. First of all, the language does not have to be prerequisite because even if you change language, that doesn't do anything to change material structure. You can still stop a person from being shot without changing language just because you don't protect the system. Does not mean it's going to happen. The Willis and Evans says that fundamentally, and the ontology of these systems is what's shaping language. The reason why we solve. He says that ontology shaped by the empire reads a piece of we know the evidence. First of all, you do nothing about the epistemology because you stay silent about the racism. The entire French argument circumstances that the arguments we're trying to solve for coloniality or the empire because of the racial science makes that assume which is the reason why even if you change your epistemology towards language, because you stay silent about these questions, you cannot change it in the right way and only do it for the wars. He said the argument, he said that Mondoni was wrong. He said all the arguments about colonialism preceded, how racism preceded coloniality, shaped coloniality. Answer this argument says that we have the accurate view of Mondoni. You do not have an alternative reason why the middle path is happening other than just gratuitous violence and negative alienation. Finally, it makes the argument except the card was way too early to make argument, which is the reason why you should not let 1 year finish it and not go into the argument. The Eurocentric fundamentalist argument is answered by a terms case arguments and impact framework arguments, and the links on these arguments prove that it's getting that's all for the terminal impact of that actor.
Okay, my first question is, how is the AF an example of emancipatory discourse?
How is that? Have an example of emancipatory discourse? Which link was that?
I'm talking about the first piece of Wilderson evidence I read that says that the reason that the K turns the case is because emancipatory discourse could only occur after the fungibility.
Because you talk about a bunch of cards and how coloniality, we break that down and then we shape these things. Without this gratuitous violence, the emancipatory discourse of modernity would give me no evidence.
Why is the fact that emancipatory discussions could only occur after slavery had happened a reason why we can't break down forms of interpretive authority?
Because even if you break down those forms of interpretation, those same systems will pop out again unless we get rid of the base, which is what our argument is.
Okay, fair enough. I guess my next question is, what do you think the links to the AF are in the context of the 1NC?
In the context of the 1NC?
Yeah, I'm talking about like what 1NC card do you think makes a link argument to the AF?
The Wilderson evidence shapes the links that are articulated, extended on in the 2A-C.
Okay, sure. I still don't understand that in the context of the AF.
In the context of the AF. I made 8 different link arguments. The first argument was that what?
Explain one of them.
Okay, the anti-ethical decision-making argument. Your cards explicitly tag that we can have justice and a new form of ethics, which is 1, it's just a reform, and 2, the entire idea of an ethical decision-making.
Okay, fair enough. Your Deloria. Okay, sure. The link to your Deloria evidence, which is the hybridity dissed, is in the context of lumping together other forms of aggression. It's right. Okay. Well, my question is, one, how does the permutation result in that? Whose impression do we lump together with that of the 1NCs?
The oppression of coloniality, you talk about the 1HC and the metaphors, and the
oppression of language?
Yeah. You forgot that the alt is a
So your argument is that minority groups such as language are conflated with things like
anti-language. No, I'm talking about your view on language and trying to group that together with David Lodge's.
Okay, then why is the fact that lumping, fine, why is the fact that lumping categorically different things together not a reason why interpretive authority is a bad method of categorization or whatever, categorizing things?
Because the interpretive authority doesn't do anything to solve for the divide and conquer tactic.
Right, but your evidence says that when we lump things together, that is bad. Obviously, that can only happen because of a lack of linguistic diversity.
That's not. It only doesn't happen only because of lack of linguistic diversity. That's
flexibility.
White supremacy operates. It's not a person doing it. It is a political system that shapes the world, built upon anti-black violence.
Is your argument on the model minority, like answer to Alcoff, simply that the oppression faced by non-black groups also falls under the umbrella of anti-blackness?
It actually does.
Okay, sure. So in the 1960s, a bunch of Korean shop owners in Los Angeles were attacked by black.
First of all, it's 1990s.
Okay, 1990s were attacked by black riots. How is that an example of anti-black racism?
Exactly what's. Wait, let me explain this one. Anti-black violence. White supremacy posited Koreans as this model minority to try and make it tricky and explain how they were going to produce violence against black people, which is why black people got angry, resented the Koreans, and attacked them. Try to
So the other procedure case.
Wait, it's not 1 in R1? Yeah, it's not 1 in R1, or?
No, for you it's 1 in R1.
Okay.
One with all the covers and everything.
Cool.
Thank you for the free case term. The Blaze claims that they deconstruct language, but they only use the metaphors of Cuba. They cannot claim that they deconstruct Latin America because without it, you can't deconstruct something when you use the words that re-entrench colonialism. That's me. That's like me and my 1HC when I'm trying to break down racial stereotypes using the word like calling myself a chink. That's not how it works. You cannot deconstruct Latin America. You reaffirm the colonial power that goes along with that. Where even speaking of the word should be rejected, Latin America exists to differentiate the white elites from black and native body terms. The kicks gone in 07. Thus, Latin America was a coin in the 19th century. And the very moment of which settler expansion, ideal Latin America pursued the strongly colonial concept of term from the locus Latin America. The white of the West Africa, the presence of black and indigenous population of modern talks of the West America. Also, if you're trying to break down metaphors and trying to break that deconstruct the metaphors of Cuba, then the metaphors of Latin America, the reason Latin America was applied to the area was so that Europeans can colonize it and divide and conquer. Also, Latin America conceptually erases the racial history of conquering oppressed people. It elevates the Europeans to the position of liberators. This is more true of their reappropriation. This is Avalar 97. The mythical conceptualizing the fact that those military changes did not run from the conflict between those conversions into temporal threat will give away relation domination like colonial and the best for erasing the uncanny paradoxal separate contradiction of free oppressive by the descent of the profession concentrating on a privileged opportunity Latin America. Now so you guys have to perform the specificity of and notice how the supremacy did not read a single card on it, nor was the one AC specific on why you should how they deconstruct the notion of Latin America. They just reintroduced now the permutation argument. Permutation cannot apply because the two ideas cannot be put into dialogue. Coloniality demands renouncing the colonial monologue entirely nullo or they may have trouble accepting Indian process through that entering the dialogue they remain the best way of rising to pass the Western civilization colonial domination can be kept in mind the future can no longer be kept in the best Western civilization tolerant that all progress cannot be placed into the more progress defending the power difference consequently can be redirected to decolonial shift aspect of what we stop but the goal rather than European construction history dialogue can only take place in decolonial disposition. Now we don't even have to win the alternative to win this as a case because this is still a dissent to how you use the constructed notion of Latin America, the notion of when you say that language and metaphors are important and you use that language and that's very egregious. All the alternatives able to solve. We are able to deconstruct a metaphor even without the notion of the one use of Latin America. Now you can go on to the case arguments. There is no impact to the language. It's ridiculous to think that language leads toward between Israel and Palestine. This is obviously a ridiculous scenario playing that should be rejected. Also, the construction of the interlinear make no sense because it's our object that you, as who as I person perceives that language. My language is going to be different for your language because I come from a different identity, from a different social location. This is why the critique can turn the impacts of the critique. Also, you have to draw the battle on the anti. You must identify yourself before you deconstruct language. The armchair philosopher claims that deconstructing language is good for all of us. And I saw when people in the when people in the inner city are just trying to survive and get along with their life. This is high theory crap that can't resolve for your identity. Worst example of ivory tower academia. Instead of dealing with problems on the ground, it retreats to world war games. The correct course of actions that workplace education actions to the consequence of atrocity. Palestine in 06. We look for the words to not say what on that about French policy. The problem being capital agenda is always someone who pushes the button where even the button compared to joke is out there founder of the Red Bull the flaw he tells off when he felt he knew the efforts to prevent he felt that alter the cruel of reality and also he didn't do so. Now still mandatory evidence extended. You do not break down objectivity into term because it's a reason. What you see is still objective because it is a disconnected generation. You should have a connection to what you're talking about, or else you're just as bad as nothing. You can't concentrate on order to the one you see is not able to serve things for another case. You still operate in a framework where you turn your back to the real problem. Discursive meaning is grounded in the body. 20 years of empirical research proves Justin Langhoff to the full range of predicting empirical evidence, going from realism, race study, support and beyond theory. Our project negates language emphasis over very topic cannot be reduced to language maintenance. Davis or the match of the economic image to reply the post of something that exists in anxiety. No more the empty moves. I'll take the cool out of the forest. He said the cool writing of he said himself some reality cannot be explained by the term what to go grammar language and restored with other primitive precision primary context of human relation and the inherent values of the real. I have more time. Go back to the Latin America. Term their use of Latin America justified the invasion by European powers. This often did in 11 the impact are not necessarily straightforward neither of regional construction. Latin is important to consider the traits of the idea of Latin America original in terms of Latin America scholar attributed to the mid-19th century to justify to plan to invade back to what shared the Latin American heritage for Latin speaking cultures.
Answer the Hiroshima argument. They don't get it as an advantage because they don't deconstruct the notion of Hiroshima.
The Hiroshima is not an advantage for the it's not offense for them because they do not deconstruct the notion of Hiroshima. We are not going for this term, however, it's just a reason why language name cannot be applied. Language names do not apply in post-modern war because things like Hiroshima, will always be in just things like those events are always going to affect our language, which means that they cannot deconstruct it entirely.
8:50.
You won't get it right there.
You read all of this in the right?
Okay. 6:43.
Are you having me cards?
Yeah, I'm just trying to set it. My computer's being kind of stupid.
Cool.
Hey, who's after you correction?
Were you all done?
Yeah, we're done.
Okay, should I just, your phone is there, computer?
I'm gonna check that. I didn't know.
Okay, I think it worked, but it has. Yeah. Yours case, the critique that was second in the 1 and C, and then the grayscale. I didn't trace this. We all ready?
Good.
Was it?
Case, Latin American race.
All right.
They said we should reject the criminal arguments. This argument lacks more to its explanation. Explanation is not that language causes international company, rather the idea that you have interpretive authority over how language operates, or that you have capital T truth on your side. The Israel-Palestine example, I think, contextualizes this pretty well. They have not really responded to the thesis level terminal impact claim. They want to see their conscientization argument proves that different, their dilemma, the conscientization argument proves that their different subject position have different ways of confronting their privilege. Our strategy is one breaking down rhetorical imperialism, which they have no reason why it's not an example of confronting your privilege. They read it, and then they read this bow chart, which I'm not really sure applies to the form of the sure. We use different concepts that may be incorporated into high here, but they have no dissent to us. They apply them to the specific context of how we've used rhetoric and metaphor to impose imperialism on Cuba. Connection to what you're talking about is the affirmative. Our argument is that yes, we as Cuba, Van Eyck and I have used rhetorical imperialism as a method for ascribing the objective meaning to Cuba. We are confronting that through the analysis presented at the 1C. Latin American. The fact that Michael just said this in the order proves that this argument is completely arbitrary. Most of the evidence is not the context actually saying the word, saying the phrase Latin America, but rather treating Latin America as one homogeneous region rather than different and polycultural sort of ethnic groups. Deconstructing metaphors that claim objectivity is what I see, which means we logically link to this argument, saying the problem is it's not the problem, but rather using it as a category that homogenizes people as well. Most of the context in the evidence, there's no link there. God just says that the term was coined by imperialists. It's not that speaking the term is imperialist, and all this is unique to the firm because it says that people are using Latin America as a concept, a homogeneous concept in which the U.S. can dominate it. Occurring in the statistical use breaks down the whole imperialism, which means we logically link to this argument. They can see that language is fundamentally contingent, which means they cannot be sure or lock down the notion that we're using Latin America as a certain way, which means this argument will not be a viable two-winner option. Critique. The one is the impact of the criticism of overgeneralization attempts to pin down disabled meanings, reaffirms a culture of interpretive authority. The interpretive evidence in the cases causes broader conflict, which I explained on the case basis. The critique may have good intentions, but we have impact for their endpoint logocentrism as a medium for change and ensures that replication means a result in network form of politics. This applies especially well when they say that anti-blackness is the sole driver of racism. Our argument is that is a form of categorization, which is ignores the flux of different types of rhetorical appeals, which can also cause colonialism. They say you have to have a performance in a method. We think the one is a performance in our method is one of breaking down rhetorical empiricism. They say we did not examine the racist underpinning of the United States. We disagree because we analyze rhetorical imperialism, which I artists made. They say state coloniality underpins metaphor. The two pieces of prose evidence will clown them on this V. We are decisively winning. It's the other way around. Metaphor paves the way for colonialism, which has produced a tangible effect. We are not silent on our racism. In fact, we are the opposite. We analyze metaphor that it causes racism in the first place. Cuba is like they say Cuba is not shaped by language or prose evidence. Simply disagrees with our economic permutation. I'm going to combine it with the Smith evidence because it contextualizes pretty well. We have built an impact terms to answer the permutation. Those the two methods are incompatible or are competitive. Say logocentric. One method of engagement politics are entire what I see is a critique of exclusivity and capital true to a certain. I don't think they respond to a fit when their analysis is productive. It is not a reasonable way to solvency with permutation. Linguistic pluralism is necessary to combat interpretive authority, which is an external impact. I already explained. Only the permutations all due to starting points are we know, and he indicates that epistemology shapes ontology, the ways in which we interact with black and indigenous people are determined by language rights used to describe them. Histologically circumvents their ontology arguments because even if race is not socially constructed, the effects of having a marked body is. The other method to the permutation is Smith evidence, which proves that the permutation is intersectionality and not assimilation. The methods of centering white supremacy is solely composed of anti-blacks and RC. Two other structuring logic or pillars of white supremacy. Money received from Orientals, Protestants, stolen land, blacks live on becomes irrelevant because the two other logic are ignored. Also, the other impacts is ignored erasure of natives and anti-black logic. Smith in 2010 stated genocides relegated about passing. And when on our United States, the shift went from mass murder and its whole indigenous people problem that genocide disappears. The result of pessimism ever edged to commercial workers do not presume given its other settled tests, not knowing people recognize the racial nature nations was sometimes and making it on pessimism and portraying white supremacy. This tendency for assuming given its settled state appears to be normal goes so far as arguing on black paradigm is parallels black and immigrant paradigm, rhetorically collapsing indigenous peoples into categories of immigrants and effective racism in relation with this land has right to refining settled project. All their theory arguments are solved by defending a competing methodology. Their constitutional arguments are just strategies that they use. We use a different one, which means that their methods are logically not competitive. Your civil society links are false. Mizalki and 2011 presidents again black church to the South World or a community organized to have heard all connecting community outside from local state teachers are able to encourage institutional innovation teachers in the city and organizing people in the community association. Martha Carter associations. First, I'm going to go ahead and answer this critique terms in case I read this piece of evidence. There's a piece of evidence which says that our argument is simply that language paves the way for slavery in Cuba, which is a specific analysis in the present.
I believe we have 7. No, we have. I use the minute 28. So we have 8. 26.
8:30. I heard about that.
Hey, when you say Smith is net benefit, we're referring to the 2 AC Smith card?
Correct.
Cool.
As well as the 1 A Smith card. That was
Yeah,
the
obviously,
different-
I
different-
can relate go behind me. Where's your mark Malchus or whatever?
You need to say that again?
Where's your mark the Malchus the wakes?
Oh, great. Oh, great. Agency?
Alright, cool. Which one? We haven't marked the association.
Where is that?
Like one
Oh yeah, I knew it was at the end of one of the boxes. Yeah, associations.
Case. Okay, Latin America.
I'm going to ask for a clarification.
Alright, anyone not ready? Okay. A big framing issue for the impact calculus is the way you're going to shape your ballot is that you should only refer impacts that you can solve. A piece of more evidence to frame a decision. It says that we need to actually seek the impression located within each of us, which is not affirmative performance, and the reshaping of effort does nothing because they're just a bunch of high-theory impacts that do not cover your own privilege. Once again, the silence arguments will not handle the sequential evidence that when you don't talk about racial in the systems of coloniality that you try and break down. That means that you make those assume no, which is the reason why the performer asks all the ones about the role of the ballot, but the methodologically performing breaks down price groups. The one, the negative performance solves this argument because the negative performance, the alternative is the unflinching paradigm elastic. That's obviously what you can see. This is an ethical question in civil society. You also say to see how it relates to society, how we problem the oppression of the violence that we protect with our daily lives. We do this analysis of the myth of the non-binary, which is a conceded argument. We can see the alcohol are coming out of the equation. It says that the myth of the non-binary and those types of psychological violence against agents is the biggest impact, which was affirmative consensus, which was that you vote for these people that best breaks that down. The system of anti-blackness shapes the myth of the modern as explaining cross-examination. The anti-black violence equate the myth of the modern to youth agents like foil, except then Asian Americans who believed in this myth gave life explicitly reject this myth to the cross-condemnation, which is the only reason by the negative force of breaking that language had absolutely no explanation of how you turn this argument. We turn the case, the culprit, and force the argument that but they don't change mosquito structure. The only thing how the changing language or metaphor solve for the people getting shot on the streets, absolutely nothing, which is the reason why you prefer the social net impact. The second argument is the oppression within each of us. If you don't address the oppression, the piece of oppression within you, that means that you cause the very same oppression, which is a song that goes on. The third argument is that race turns coloniality, because the logic of coloniality justified because the people came to America. They had to justify the people in another land of America. We're not people, and that is only justified through a system of white supremacy and anti-black. Now, he said that the white impact how colonialism he said that criminal evidence leads to conflict. The criminal evidence says high ignorance. How do you stop conflict? It's really passed by changing ignorance. There was no explanation on this, which is the reason why you only evaluate impacts that you can solve by yourself. He says that anti-blackness is the sole driver. We say it's the main driver, except we have 12 of that driver all leaving the language. He says that we ignore the flux. What, except you ignore the flux too. What causes racism? These are questions left unanswered by the affirmative. What are these other things that this flux talks about and that language talks about? And how do you change those things? These are all unanswered questions, which is the reason why you prefer the alternative. He said that the white student method, well, even if the white student method is a bad method because you did that before, it's the problem. You dropped the argument that you just ran this argument strategically when you normally read the type of violent Cuba that we talk about in cross-examination, which was a drop down the reason why you supporting your point. He said that metaphors on colonialism. How does it do that? How does something people king shot? You should protect it to another time. You have to do it in order to answer all these arguments. If you cannot in line with the 1 AR 2 8 R, that means that you should not evaluate the argument. The second argument about evidence is that you should not evaluate any cause of that explicit authentic attachments. I didn't know which speech I have to read. The permutation. You dropped the opportunity cost argument. This is not the movie argument. This is the reason why you don't get a permutation. Because permutation is built on the opportunity cost of the king of federal actions. If you did not do this, that means that you should not get a permutation because it takes away all the negative ground that we have. Because you have an unprincipled starting point. If you're not affirmative resolution, what the hell do we know today? Which is the reason why you not get the affirmative impact to this argument. Because one is fluid is another link to anti-blackness. Because anti-blackness, the black body is a solid and not static and always marked by violence when it comes to civil society. You drop too many link arguments, you win the permutation too. The one argument about the hospitality was dropped coming out of the way. See, the hospitality argument is that when you're trying to wonder, that means that opens yourself up. Except black bodies cannot use this type of wonder. We say that your method is inaccessible to people. It's the reason why you should be dead because the consequence of killing his body change on public is in the context of capitalism and also the science organization of his body back, which is the reason why it's still racist. The Smith benefit. First of all, the Smith evidence is an indict of Sexton. We didn't ever read Sexton, which is the reason why it's not authored. The project constitution and look at a piece of oppression within yourself would also solve cell violence because the system of anti-blackness and exchange cell violence a little bit and they're hand in hand and same side of the same coin. Will listen agrees with that argument. The theory of competing methods does not solve competing methods does not solve an anti-black argument. Only if we can find federal government policy which is solving argument. So another drop down interpretation was performative violence. You are trying to see like project constitution or not, which is the reason why you should perform that. The hybridity argument is also dropped when you group together oppression that finally the civil society when false argument is really in the context of black church. Even people are living that does not mean that they're not ontologically bad. Now, go to the case argument. One has dropped the against argument again. Yes, it may be true that different people have different ways to come from religion, but the answer explicitly says that the philosopher has to identify his or her location. Now, as that said, it works too much. Their ideas just prove that they are viewed from our several impacts. I know the inaccuracies, the negligence when they speak for another, they can make overarching claims about what's good for you. This turns the case because absence that deconstructed language into capital teachers. And in reality, deconstructed legend doesn't do anything when people come to commoditization. Without the representation idea, the implication of ways it can be applied to other groups. This causes action where people listen to impacts all across the world. This turns the case because people like the native are predominantly much that good for anyone. Go library here. We're not going to go for this argument. Even if they have straight terms, we'll concede that there is no link except the impact arguments and the impact framework such as because the one area tonight is an eternal impact to the library case. Also, you have to use the library in the way so I don't know how I can solve it. Finally, impact to the answer to race. A philosopher recovered of saying that the solution best about understanding the struggles out of the race. This is a sequencing argument just without knowing that you cannot deconstruct language.
Did you write it down? I wrote it down somewhere.
I remember it was like 6:33. Does that sound accurate?
What?
6:33. 6:33.
Yeah, that's fine, right?
Because we all hear Case K.
Right.
Case K.
Yes, is the answer to that question.
Oh, I thought you asked for it again, I'm sorry. Great. Everyone good? Oh, sorry. Everyone good?
Most of the ANC evidence will be answered on the permutation, but they have conceded that we recognize our own privilege via the 1ACU, have found a way to combat oppression and recognize our own privilege. That was the 1NC. We found our own way. That was the 1AC, which takes out their internal intent and short circuits most of the impact arguments here. I don't think his ANC evidence is as good as he thinks it is in the context of the 1AC, which is a reason why this offense is relatively uncompelling. The criticism of the 200 has underemphasized the impact of debate and has underemphasized the impact of it. The 1AC is an impactor to the endpoint of the criticism with external impact of interpretive authority that they have no defense to. Their attempt to pin down the resolution to categorical exactness is a form of interpretive authority that our Krippendorf evidence indicates leads to violence because it fits a square peg into a round hole by applying objective lenses to subjective issues that causes international conflict and causes an over-reliance on conflict as a tool of foreign policy. The 2NR does not really explain an impact scenario for the criticism, which means you should default to 2AR analysis. They've conceded that the status quo use of language as a tool to cement hierarchies of oppression this is substantiated by the Israel-Palestine example that the 2AC give, where negotiations break down because people think they have capital T truth on their side. This debate is a question of comparative impact defense. All of our link arguments and link defense and permutation arguments also function as impact mitigation. Do not let the 2NR spin his way out of a zero applicable defense 1NC. They've conceded that the case is a way to confront our own privilege, which is the tiebreaker, and also answer theory anti-evidence on the case flow. This answers also both of their conscientization arguments because different people have used different strategies to combat oppression, and we recognize privilege. Takes out their silencing arguments because rhetorical imperialism was a tool of white supremacy. It also takes out the inaccessibility link because it allows each to get their own avenues to combat oppression. There are two framing issues that should frame the thesis of the criticism. Basic point is a question of uniqueness. They have conceded that the status quo, their criticism is descriptive of the status quo, i.e. the status quo uses language as a rhetorical tool to cement forms of hierarchy and oppressions. Things like the 3/5 compromise could only occur because people, the black body was pinned down to linguistic categorical exactness, which is a form of interpretive authority that the 1AC has reconciled. The basic point is the law and racism arguments, which were definitely extended in the 1NR and the 2NR has zero answer to. The Solomon Brady Boy evidence indicates that there is a correlation between the between law and forms of oppression. There's a sequencing data to the criticism that the 2NR has not come to grips with. Their advocacy fails to recognize the interconnectedness of the two, i.e. language determines the direction of law. That's the McManus and Solomon Brady Boy evidence. The alternative does not tackle questions of linguistic pluralism, which means that they necessarily allow for the perpetuation of legal underpinnings of the same same institutions that reinforce white supremacy and draft legislation. This is not answered by their emancipatory discussions argument because it is in the context of because that evidence is in the context of liberation of slavery, which obviously had to be presupposed by slavery, but they have not attacked the interpretive underpinnings of their arguments. They say you should prefer impacts, you can solve this. It's not exclusive of the 1AC, also the permutation reconciles. So they say we have high theory impacts. That's just not a fair characterization of the 1AC. We have specific scenarios that are not related to linguistic loftiness. They say that we don't break down coloniality. This was answered in the overview. They say that the mythical model minority arguments will be answered on their permutation. They case turns arguments. They say they change structures that long language. Actually, I'm just going to go to the permutation because it reconciles most of this. I understand that we got outspread in the block on the link debate, but the Smith evidence alone is sufficient to provide an affirmative valid critiques the meta-level thesis of the alternative, which also implicates all of their link arguments because they presuppose that slipability is the sole driver of white supremacy, both the solvency deficit for the alternative and proof that the permutation is the best option. I will explain the Smith evidence very clearly here because it is the way that we are going to win the debate. There are three pillars of oppression. First is the black-white. Second, which the alternative emphasizes. The second and third are conceptions of Occidentalism in the Orient, which we have second and third are common conceptions of Occidentalism in the Orient, which we have addressed in the form of destruction of the status quo ties to Cuba, and the pillar of the settler and settlers, which is obviously directed by the affirmative because Cuba was owned by the indigenous people until language is used as a rhetorical tool of imperialism. The implication of these pillars is that it is a parasitic relationship, i.e. overemphasis on the black-white binary. In the instance of the alternative, ignores the fact that black-white binary resulted in the appropriation of indigenous land by settlers to create plantations. The permutation solves because it incorporates a theory of intersectionality, not assimilation, which is the two arguments that build on fails to take an intersectional approach, which allows people to say we've made our gains, so now we're done, and pits groups against each other. Also, internal in terms of model minority arguments, because the only reason why Asians are deployed as schools of anti-blackness is because of an overemphasis on blackness and whiteness and ignorance of the other two pillars of repression. They say that we shouldn't get a permutation method debate doesn't disprove the theory of competition. They say that we're not accessible to the black body. That was answered. Both they say the hospitality and hybridity links are both implicated by the Smith evidence because they're defined as only they're defined in the context of slavability.
Identity is in fluid language.
Identity is in fluid languages, which takes out most of the work arguments. We do not deconstruct identity, we deconstruct language.